Endeavor Horizons of the Infinite, Episode 11. Endeavor to Take a Vacation, Part 1. By Elton Garr. The clamps of the space dock rang through the ship as the starship Endeavor settled into place, systems shifting into standby for post-battle repairs. Regan, the ship's pilot, jumped to her feet and, trying to hide her excitement, said,
"Permission to disembark."
"Really, Regan? I had assumed you'd want to use your extra time to run some of the longer simulations,"
Commander Hester said.
"What? I mean, if that's what you think I should do."
Regan said.
"No. Take your vacation. You work too hard, and that's coming from someone who was genetically altered to have to sleep less,"
Tabitha said.
"Do you have any plans, Commander?"
Regan asked, not sure why. She had grown to like Commander Hester well enough, but what she really wanted was to get off the Endeavor and enjoy her vacation.
"I'll explore the many options for entertainment that you can find on a shipyard, run almost entirely by robots,"
Tabitha said. Regan didn't allow her excitement to be dampened by the commander or get upset. The more you knew the commander, the more clear it was that she wasn't trying to ruin your day. She was just a bit more blunt than most people were comfortable with. Besides, Regan had grown up poor on a station where everything cost money, so she had learned to entertain herself. Once she was off the bridge, she had to hold back the urge to run. The commander was right about one thing. There was nothing to rush to. She'd be lucky if there was a bar. But she feared she'd end up on the Endeavor visiting their mess, simply because there was nothing else to do. She checked her credits as she waited at the airlock. She had saved up a bit after years of piloting a cargo ship, but she made almost that much on the Endeavor every month, and there wasn't that much to spend it on out here in the frontier. Alonzo moved next to her as she was waiting for the airlock to open. That was familiar. She remembered meeting him at an airlock. That felt like years ago, but it was only a few months.
"Are you excited about your vacation?"
Regan asked. Alonzo seemed to realize she was there when he heard his name and said,
"I thought I'd get a chance to work on some of the Endeavor's subsystems while the ship was down, but Patch insists that I leave the ship and don't come back for 2 weeks."
"There are 3 other ships of the same design as the Endeavor. Perhaps you can spend your vacation crawling around inside their maintenance tunnels,"
Regan said, as the hiss of the airlock began.
"Do you think they'd let me? It could be an interesting way to get a fresh perspective on the alterations we've made to the Endeavor. And I could explain to them the problems we had with the signal phase relays decoupling due to overlapping field harmonics,"
Alonzo said. Suddenly Regan had a better understanding of why Commander Hester had said she worked too hard. She wasn't that bad. Though she had found herself typing out the commands for the airlock controls in the air while she waited.
"First one off the ship,"
the captain said from behind Regan. She felt no anxiety when she realized the captain was standing behind her. She was the one person who was on the ship because the captain had requested her, and while there wasn't any real room for the two of them to be friends, she thought of him almost as family.
"I'm the least useful person on the ship once we're moored,"
Regan said, then continued,
"but I am surprised you're getting off so quickly."
"The corporations have my entire stay scheduled. And if we were here another week, I'm pretty sure they'd be able to fill that with meetings too,"
the captain said. Regan wanted to complain for the captain, but she was pretty sure he had already went further than he should. And his position was more tenuous than any of them cared to admit. His biggest advantage was that none of the corporations really wanted him in command, which meant none of them felt the need to fight that command. But it also meant that none of them were willing to fight to keep him, so if he upset anyone too much, he could be fired. And then there were the ships she saw when they were pulling in. There had been 3 when they left a few months ago. There were now 5. All of them nearly identical to the Endeavor and in various stages of competition. When those finished, the corporations could begin to divide up the fleet instead of needing an impartial captain. Regan opened her mouth to ask if there was any way to help, but the airlock opened and everyone began to move. Just as well, she knew what the captain would say. She needed a vacation. And he was right. The shipyard had been made by the exact same people who made the Endeavour, and so if she hadn't spent the last 3 months on the Endeavour, she'd barely be able to tell the difference. But even the air smelled different, and the metal was a darker silver. She was about to ask Alonso about that, more because she knew how much he'd enjoy explaining it than because she cared. But before she could, a robot with the Parallax logo covering most of its chest said,
"Greetings, Endeavour crew members. Parallax Innovations would like to offer you the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to explore our Mirage technology for free. Though an endorsement of the technology from a member of the best ship in the fleet would be appreciated."
We're not interested.
Regan said, a bit surprised there were random solicitors on the station already.
Wait, I heard about Mirage. It's a fascinating technology.
Alonso said.
Can you name one technology you don't find fascinating?
Regan asked.
You just need it explained. They use a B23Q projector, and...
The robot interrupted and said,
"It creates a virtual environment in a physical space using patented Parallax B23Q projection cores and our signature sync skin interiors, allowing you to visit any time and place you wish."
Wait, so an actual vacation but like a video game?
Regan said.
If you want to ignore all the interesting tech details, that's mostly accurate.
Alonso said. She'd let him tell her about the next door mechanism they ran into, or something similar to make up for not being able to explain Mirage in detail.
Yes, though the number of available locations and scenarios are somewhat restricted until it is out of beta.
The robot said. It sounded more human now than when it was giving what was likely a pre-planned speech.
I'm in. And Alonso can't resist exploring new tech.
Regan said.
Excellent. Take this to Airlock 7. It will allow you access to our fully automated system.
Done with its sales pitch, the robot turned away from them and began to approach other members of the Endeavour. As they began to walk towards Airlock 7, Alonso said,
There could be an Endeavour-class package in their scenario index.
Regan actually stopped and said,
You want to simulate the ship that we were just on, when you could go and do anything?
There's no safe way to reach the plasma trunk during operation. Simulated access would let me inspect it without shutdown.
There are times when it's hard to be your friend.
Regan said. This time it was Alonso who stopped and said,
Are we friends?
She hadn't even considered the word, but she knew something of Alonso's history. Nothing concrete, but he had made enough hints, and she knew him well enough that she suspected that wasn't something he had a lot of.
Of course we're friends.
He didn't say anything, he just looked curiously into the air for about a second, and then smiled, and began to walk a little faster. The airlock looked exactly like the one that they had come from. They each put the card they had been given up against the door, and it opened. Once in the airlock, a contract appeared on the screen. It was the same impossible-to-understand jargon you had to sign to do anything on the station Regan had grown up on. She had always known they were used to control people, but she also knew that no matter what the corporations said, they weren't optional. And these were no different, because when she glanced back at the door, she saw that the door light was off for both the entrance into the ship and the exit. It was almost certainly officially a mistake, but it didn't look as if they could leave the airlock without signing it. So she scrolled to the bottom, then put her thumb against the pad next to it.
You're supposed to read the release form.
Alonso said.
Do you want to spend your vacation in an airlock? Because the exit is locked too.
Regan said, and then walked through the door. Alonso said something, but it was cut off by the door shutting, and Regan found herself in a hallway. It extended most of the length of the ship, and had doors spaced evenly along one side. Above each door was a sign that read either private or public, though none of them were lit up. Next to each door was a computer screen with a long list of options. She had barely made it halfway down the first page when Alonzo walked up to her. She said,
Beach paradise seems good. Want to try it?
I don't swim.
Alonzo said.
I'm not even sure we can. You know more about this than I do.
Regan said.
It depends on too many parameters to be certain. It is possible. But there also appears to be a filter function, so we can find something we both like.
Alonzo said.
You know we don't have to go in the same room. There are like 50 of them.
Regan said.
If I'm making this less enjoyable, I can go.
Alonzo said, already turning.
No. You're not. I just want you to have fun.
Regan said.
The number of available simulations makes it likely that two people who are friends would find at least one they can both enjoy.
Well, that upped the pressure. So she began to scroll through, and as she did, Alonzo said,
That one? The flight of the ardent cargo.
Regan looked at it, then read the description.
Play the part of the heroic Captain Adrian Watt's rescue of 100,000 soldiers from a powerful Genic fleet. Fight off waves of alien ships, battle in the hallways of the ship, and live the life of the greatest hero in the Commonwealth.
It sounds exciting.
Fiction usually is. You know I was there, right?
The captain was the only one aboard during the final approach.
Alonzo said.
Because he ordered us to abandon ship before he went in. But I helped write the flight program. There were no dogfights. He used the faster-than-light engines to fly past the fleet and landed before they could attack him.
Regan said.
Still, you could help me contextualize the structure.
Alonzo said.
Later. I need to relax. How about a visit to Habitat 17? It's bound to have something interesting.
Alonzo looked at it and read,
An adventure on the oldest station in the Commonwealth.
We can skip the adventure part. It's an elite habitat. Only the wealthiest people, so it's got to be nice, even if it's fake.
I wouldn't mind seeing some of the vintage systems. They used vacuum-rated conduit and hand-calibrated regulators, while civilians were still living in the shell.
She didn't know if it was any more primitive than being poor on one of the habitats now. But then she had never understood the difference between being poor and rich until she had been on the ardent cargo. Before then she had mostly thought rich meant you had enough food.
Well, let's go then.
Just a second. It has the same structure as the Pi drone firmware. Config trees exposed. Yeah. Backdoors still mapped to root.
Why do you need full access?
He typed in something, and then a whole list of options appeared next to the description of Habitat 17. There were a few genre options, including comedy, romance, and others she pointedly ignored, since they certainly weren't going to pick them. Near the bottom was a line that read, lifelike experience. And before she could think about it, Alonzo had picked that, along with a couple others that seemed fairly vague. Finally, at the bottom was a button that read, Total Immersion.
Are you certain that's a good idea? They had it disabled for a reason.
Unstable modes usually expose undocumented behavior,
Alonzo said as the door opened, and he stepped through without asking. Whatever happened, she wasn't going to let him do it on his own, so she stepped through with him and almost 200 years into the past. She doubted that it had actually looked this way, as a bulky robot walked by. It didn't slow as they went, and she realized that the robots would at least simulate those from the past, with programming barely complex enough to do the simplest of tasks, and with no personality. There were only a few people here, nowhere near what likely would have been on the station. One of the women who walked by had an old-fashioned dress, wide and covered in bright flower patterns, and the men all wore hats, and one of them had a cane. Before she had a chance to acclimate, a child ran up to her and said,
Are you here to help us?
The kid was surprisingly realistic. Perhaps the settings that Alonzo had changed had something to do with that, though she doubted they'd make them look worse intentionally.
Save you from what?
The kid looked confused and said,
A group of communists took over the command center and are threatening to blow up the station if we don't seize all commerce and give them everything so everyone is the same.
Regan couldn't bring herself to pretend to be surprised by the propaganda built into the simulation. This was built by one of the most powerful corporations in the Commonwealth, and arguably the one that had the most to lose from ideas of spreading wealth, since its focus on automation and robots meant far more of its profit went to the elite. Still, she had a wicked idea, so she said.
And what if we're here to help them?
The child recoiled in horror and said,
Wait, are you saying you want to be the villains?
We would.
Alonzo said. The child seemed to freeze and then said in a different voice,
Simulation altered. Last stand of Station 17 story enabled. It is strongly recommended that safety protocols be enabled to avoid serious injury or death. You have 5 minutes to prepare.
Almost without thinking, Regan said,
Enable safety protocols.
There was a buzz, and it said,
The simulation must be restarted to disable realism.
Regan glanced at Alonzo, but he already looked panicked enough and rushed over to where the door had been. It was still there, of course, the projection just hid it, but when he held up the card, the computer simply said,
Realism mode engaged. Complete simulation to end.
We have to get someplace safe.
Regan said.
I can bypass the lock.
Can you do it in 4 minutes?
I can't guarantee it.
Alonzo said.
Then we run, because in 4 minutes, this corporate-built simulation is going to make a point about why fighting against corporations is a bad idea by having everything and everyone in this place try to kill us.
Author's note.
I'm not sure if there's anything more Star Trek than the holodeck episode. And some of them were a lot of fun. But they were also contrived, because it would be insane to build them if you couldn't just cut the power. So I think it makes a lot more sense in the Commonwealth universe, where it's built by a ruthless corporation instead of the Federation and explicitly said to be experimental. The other thing I want to explore are the moral implications. I already hinted at one use that I won't get into, but I think the idea of propaganda is just one of the ways it could be misused. And I plan to explore more of that, along with some action in the next episode. Thank you. Elton Gar.